Magick.me is the world's greatest school for magic, meditation, and mysticism. You can learn everything there, from chaos magic to hermeticism to meditation to how to supercharge your finances and take absolute control of your destiny. In short, you get all of the tools you need to turn chaos into beautiful, scintillating order and master your life. It's incredible. You've probably heard me talk about it on the show quite a lot. But check it out. It's growing fast. And I just want to say, if you're confused about where to start, because I have so many courses there, the Adept Initiative is the place to go. The Adept Initiative is the flagship course on magick.me, and it contains everything you need to know to master the most profound ancient techniques of changing your consciousness and the most modern and cutting-edge tools and systems for absolutely turning your life into a masterpiece. You are really going to dig it. Go check it out, and I will see you in class. It's magick.me, magick.me. Yes, hello. It's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultra Culture Podcast. My guest today is Ika Johannsson, and we are talking about Swedish metal. Her book is Blood, Fire, Death, the Swedish Metal Story, and we're going to be talking about the ups and downs of the metal scene throughout the 90s, including the infamous events depicted in the book and movie Lords of Chaos. Here's just a little bit about the book. In the early 1990s, Swedish musicians revolutionized the international music scene with their groundbreaking interpretations of what metal music could be. Suddenly, the mild-mannered Scandinavian country found itself at the forefront of a new movement with worldwide impact, thanks to bands such as Entombed, Dismember, and At the Gates. The birth of black metal drove the culture to even greater extremes, featuring a raw, darker sound and non-ironic death worship. Soon, churches in both Norway and Sweden were aflame, and before long, Satanism emerged as more than just an image. But how did it all start? Why did Sweden become a hotbed for such aggressive, nihilistic music? And who are the people and bands that brought it all about? Blood, Fire, Death, a Swedish metal story recounts the evolution of the genre from the massive amplifier walls of 1970s rock, through the church-burning satanic 1990s, to the diverse and paradoxical manifestations of the scene today. This book focuses on the phenomena that have propelled the scene forward in an evolution that has not only been musical, but aesthetic and ideological as well. This book is a story about grotesque logos and icons that invoke death and darkness, but also a story of dedication, friendship, community, and profound love for music. Okay, we've got a great conversation ahead of us, going back in time through some of the most important events of underground music history in the last few decades. So please, without further ado, welcome Ika Johansson. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I've been looking forward to this podcast. Do you want to say a little bit about your book and your background as well? So we're talking about Blood, Fire, Death, the Swedish Metal Story.
Okay, my name is Ika Johannesson, and I am 49 years old, and I grew up in Gothenburg in the late 80s. I've been a metalhead since I was, basically 4 or 5 years old when I discovered Kiss. And I grew up with the people who formed the bands that would create what is called the Gothenburg sound of death metal. Bands like At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, and In Flames. And we grew up together, and I saw the scene happen and was a part of it. And about 20 years later, me and my co-author, John Jefferson Klingberg, we decided to try to summarize the birth of the Swedish scene by choosing different bands and some subjects that we think have been vital to the development of the scene. And so the book Blood, Fire, Death, a Swedish metal story, came out in Sweden in 2011 and in the States in 2018 on Feral House. which is still unbelievable to me that I have a book out on Feral House because it's a publishing house I really like.
Yes, definitely. So it feels to me like metal is a worldwide phenomenon now, and it's not necessarily local, but it's certainly a lot of it comes from the Scandinavian countries. What are your thoughts on that?
I just recently curated an exhibition called Der Harte Norden, the Heavy North, at the Nordic embassies in Berlin, in which I tried to answer this question: why is there so much metal music coming out of the Nordic countries, specifically the Scandinavian countries, as the Nordic countries, which are Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland. And it's kind of hard to say. Sweden and Norway and also Finland are the major countries. But Denmark had and has Merciful Fate, which has been like a super important pioneering band. But then in Sweden, the death metal started developing at the same time as it did in the US, of course. And then black metal was partly born in Sweden through Bathory, a super important band, but brought to the world in the early 90s by the Norwegian bands, of course, and all the violent things that happened there. And Finland has basically just been a provider of super good music and really kind of weird takes on both genres, like ever since the 90s. But people generally talk about our climate, the fact that we have so much darkness in the winter and so much light in the summer, which can actually be equally hard to deal with. The fact that it just never turns dark. I mean, as you can see in the back of me, that's the window, and it's past 9 p.m.
Okay,
and it's not gonna go dark for hours, and mentally that can take a toll on you too. And in the wintertime, it goes dark at like 2 p.m. and then it doesn't get light again until like 9 a.m. And so that's one thing, and also the cold, and the fact that we live up here, which I'm guessing people in Canada and of course parts of Russia and other parts of the world that is up in this part of the hemisphere, it affects the way you are as a person. We are generally thought as pretty taciturn, pretty introverted, maybe not the most social people. We tend to keep things inside. That's why a lot of Scandinavians love coming to the States, because here there's this kind of repression of the self, that it's like, don't think you're anything. Don't believe that you are special. And when you come to the States, and it's like, whoa, everything is possible.
Why would you say that attitude is prevalent there, that you can't be anything? Because in the U.S., people kind of idolize the Scandinavian countries in the U.S. and see them as a paradise, but I'm not necessarily sure that's the case.
Well, that was before socialism and our healthcare was kind of whittled down. It was a paradise in some ways, let me say, in some ways, with, government-funded healthcare and education and such. But, with the privatization of everything, the globalization of everything, that's not the same as it was in the 70s and 80s. But I think it's, of course, it's the old Christian beliefs that has influenced a lot of the countries here, and that also, it's the kind of Protestant Christian thinking that is kind of anti-individualist, and what that kind of mentality results in many things. Like a theory is that's why we express ourselves so violently in the music, because most of us up here aren't very violent people, and especially people in the metal scene are pretty like calm people.
Okay.
Except for some black metalers, of course, and there's always exceptions to that rule. But I think many people think that has to do with it, like the kind of lid that you put on yourself up here, like in the way that society works. So that can be one reason. Also, the Swedish, or at least also the Scandinavian sounds of metal are pretty heavily influenced by folk music. There's a melancholy in the folk music that has affected the music from these countries as well a lot.
That I was not aware of. So what is the connection to folk music? And would you say that metal is, in a way, a type of folk music?
It's not in a way a type of folk music, but the Scandinavian metal bands or the Nordic metal bands have been pretty affected by the melodies of folk music, especially Swedish death metal, especially the metal from Gothenburg, has been quite influenced by that. And there are also, folk metal, like pagan metal, Viking metal, which is basically different subgenres of a very folk influenced kind of metal where you use traditional folk instruments like violins, accordions, hurdy-gurdies even. Not my kind of metal, but it's huge, especially in Germany. It's pretty big up here as well. But I think it's basically, we're brought up with folk music. It's always been around us. So I think it has affected the musicality and the way you write harmonies and the way you kind of just put the music together.
Interesting. This brings me to, I think probably the thing about this subject that is most interesting to me, and probably definitely the most interesting to people listening to this podcast, is the religious dimension of metal. You've mentioned paganism, Christianity. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in the occult and Satanism in some of these bands. And that has always fascinated me because although I've never been a metalhead, really, I'm a goth, more mellow. But although but I've known and been friends with tons. And that has something that has always struck me about it is there really does seem to be this kind of pagan revival or survival even in it. And that maybe a better way to put that is that in metal, there seems to be a conversation happening about what is religion, what is the nature of individual, even ethnic identity, things like this. And that's just something that I'm really interested in, if you want to address that.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking it's very different. I mean, to begin with, the book is about extreme metal, which is basically death and black metal. Death metal is quite unpolitical and intellectual, people would say, at least in the beginning. I wouldn't say it is that today, but religion, Satanism, and the occult is pretty much exclusively a subject within black metal. Just to clarify that for your viewers. It's a generalization, but just to clarify that. So in the beginning, when the scenes evolved, these were teenagers that started these genres back in the early 80s. And of course, when you're a teenager, you want to explore everything and anything that seems dangerous or that the adult world doesn't like. So then it was like a mishmash of horror movies, Satanism, most often, Church of Satan, Anton LaVey kind of Satanism, and just basically what you intellectually as a teenager could, learn and experiment with. And I remember I've been to you were at someone's 80-year-old birthday party and someone had found a bat and we're going to, sacrifice this bat to the gods and Satan. It was that kind of level of stuff. You were drinking like light beer and just thinking you're in this black ritual. But that's what it was in the beginning because you're young but then, I mean, people in, especially Norway and some bands in Sweden as well, started taking this more seriously and reading up on more. I myself is not very knowledgeable within the different, the literature, the occult literature. On top, of course, I had Necronomicon and the Book of Satan.
The classics,
the required reading of like a 16-year-old, but. Yeah. But people started delving deeper into it and reading other types of literature and books but in the beginning it was, if we talk about the Norwegian scene, which was the first, where that part of this genre was established, there was this band called Mayhem, and they wanted to take things further. Also, as a teenager, you just want to up the ante the entire time. Who can play faster? Who can be the most evil? Who can be the most violent? And they were a really good band, and they got a singer that moved over from Sweden called Pelle Dead. And together they really, delved into trying to make the most evil music ever. And before he laid down singing tracks, he had found a dead raven in the woods, and he kept that dead bird in a plastic bag, and he, inhaled the fumes of death before laying, down the tracks just to emulate death. He dug his stage clothes into the earth, so to try and emulate like the most rotten feel ever. And also, this was a pretty small group of people, and the whole story that started that was that this guy Pelle committed suicide, and when the guitarist Euronymous discovered him, he, instead of calling the ambulance, he went to the nearest gas stations and brought a disposable camera. And he took pictures of the body, and he had shot himself in the brain and the head. And they took photos and decided that this should be the promo photos for our next album. That's when you're in a group and you're also a teenager and your empathy isn't really developed, and you pressure each other to push limits. So, to them, this was kind of normal, which it wasn't to all of them. But so the band, like the bass player dropped out of the band because he thought that this was just too extreme. But this spread to the burgeoning underground scene. And everyone was like, oh, Mayhem is the most serious band. And then Euronymous, the guy who took the photos, started a record he had a record company, and he started a record store, and there people started meeting and having meetings and rituals, and they called themselves the Black Circle, and tried to experiment with Satanism. And I mean, I wasn't part of it. I don't know what happened, but
were you around the scene at that time?
Sorry?
Were you around the scene during when all this stuff was happening?
I was around the scene, but I was in Sweden.
Okay.
And this is in Norway. This is in Oslo. And then churches started burning in 92. One thing, Sweden is a much more secular country than Norway is. Norway has been lots more, they were even run by a minister back in those days. You could never find anything to shop on a Sunday ever in Norway back in those days. So, like, the Swedish bands never really had to rebel against the Christianity, because here it's not been a thing, really.
Right.
As it also hasn't in Denmark or Iceland, for that matter.
That's kind of funny, just in a parallel to the U.S., where we have super Christian areas, and the bands that start there are all rebelling against Christianity, and then you have bands that started like San Francisco, and they're like, "What are you talking about? This is not an
exactly." Yeah, we just want to party and play fast and just want to riff out. Yeah, so it's very different, but so a lot of things happened in like between 92 and 94. Churches were burning. A person in a prominent band murdered a homosexual man, and then Euronymous, the leader of Mayhem, was murdered by his bandmate Varvikenes. And so this whole thing, it became like a real, satanic panic, as you well know in the States what that is. So like for a while, the churches were burning all over the Nordic countries, mostly in Sweden and Denmark, because there are so many connections in the bands. People had like really close ties. And there was also a murder by two people in this scene in 96 as well. So that made the Norwegian black metal spread all over the world, of course. And this is something that the bands today are so tired of talking about. But on the other hand, if that hadn't happened, I mean, looking at the quality of the music and basically the genre that was established through this, the bands had probably gotten to be known all over the world anyway. But, you can't deny the spectacularness, the media. It was a media frenzy.
Yeah, I think it's definitely here. It's the first thing that people think of when they think about the scene. And part of that is, the book Lords of Chaos that came out from Feral House. Part of it is the movie that was made out of that. And then, of course, Varg got into people's attention again when he started becoming a Nazi vlogger during the Trump years. So
he was a Nazi already back then.
Okay. But he started collecting a following again before he was kicked off YouTube. But I love it. I mean, his kind of monologues in the woods in camouflage wear, it's kind of hypnotic, I must say. Definitely a bizarre individual. But I'm not surprised that people are sick of talking about this. So
the Norwegian bands are so tired of it, and I understand that too, because it wasn't all of the bands either, and many people, also I think when you wake up from the group psychosis that can happen, when you're in a group and you're like, discover that, did I really want it to go this far? Maybe, was I behind this or not? I mean, of course, some people were and are, and in Sweden as well, and still stand by beliefs that are extreme. Many aren't. Many don't, But I mean, when Kerrang put Vari on the cover with a knife and then put it like he was a good-looking guy, and put a photo of him with a knife, and I think I remember it was a bare-breasted photo. Everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen." He speaks about pissing on people's graves. Like, how can it get any more cooler? It's stupid as an adult, of course, but back then it was just like, whoa. When I interviewed the singer in the Icelandic band Solstafir, he said that Solstafir was actually formed after him seeing that photo of Varg in Kerrang magazine.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that photo, actually. Talk about that group psychosis, though, because that's really interesting, and that's obviously certainly not unique to music scenes, but it is something that is part of growing up often, whether it's gangs or music or other groups. Were you in? Did you feel that you were drawn into that at the time, or
no,
you were kind of like comfortably observing from Sweden?
Yeah,
there was no group mind effect going on.
I never. I'm not drawn to violence, and I'm not drawn to. I kind of stay away from violence, and when people go black, when they go dark, that scares me because of stuff in my background and being close to dark people. And
so you mean even when they adopt the music style?
Oh no, that's fine. But if you see someone go dark and starting to shut down and maybe criticizing and starting to hate, I don't hate. I'm not a hateful person, and many people are drawn to black metal because of the hateful aura, especially back in the day, and also especially when you're young. You find if you, for example, you could have grown up in a terrible way and you have hate brewing inside you, of course it's easy to be drawn to a genre that's kind of built on hate towards society, towards religion, towards people in many ways. Black metal is a genre that's against everything. It's even against yourself. I love the music. I love black metal music, but I've never been into the philosophy of it because I don't have that. I'm kind of, to be honest, more of a death metal beer kind of girl.
Okay.
Okay. I like having a good time. I like it when I'm assaulted by sound.
Okay.
But not by violence.
Yes.
So I was looking at it from afar and seeing some friends disappear into this and being worried for them. And but it was very interesting to come back to it when we started researching the book. We worked on the book for like 7 years.
Wow.
Because we wanted to get answers to certain questions, like what happened during those meetings in the Black Circle. Did the singer of Abruptum, a Swedish black metal band, was he really locked into a coffin with a microphone to, set his claustrophobia going to get the real anxiety screams? Yes, that was true. Stuff that we were wondering, who was Pelle Dead? How could a 17-year-old boy come to think of things as breathing in a dead bird's, the scent of a dead bird? To me, that's like a really open mind, an artful open mind of a 17-year-old. So what we tried to do is delve into certain people that have been like real vital to the scene, who they were and why they came to influence the scene so much.
So what was this like looking back on it as an adult at this point? You mentioned a couple things, like some of these things now seem silly as an adult, but clearly if you worked on this book for 7 years, this still has a hold on you. It's still part of you. So there's a, like you were saying, you needed to go back and get questions answered. So what was it like experiencing this again as an adult?
It was really interesting because for many people, especially the people within the black metal scene, it was the first time that they had spoken about it and really thought about it. Nowadays, there are like thousands of black metal documentaries and books. But when the book came out in Sweden, it was pretty much the first one after Lords of Chaos. And the Lords of Chaos book, I'm not going to say anything about it, but it's filled with, at least the first edition, which was the one I bought, is like filled with errors. You probably all know. There's and they really picked like only the worst things, and it's really not nuanced at all. I'm guessing that all has been changed in later editions, and but that was like the only testament to what had happened. And so we wanted to, there were so many questions that came from the Lords of Chaos book, like, okay, so how did this happen? And what do you think about it today, what you did, I remember talking to Jon Christiansen. He goes by the name Metallion. He is the editor of Slayer Mag, which is the absolute most important fanzine from back in the day. And he was like, thinking back of it, he was like, we were brainwashed by ourselves, we had completely shaved off all empathy. And there weren't that many, that's the thing. It was a handful of people, but it became all the attention. It's of course, it was, okay, I'm trying to think of the word. When you get drunk, it's when you get really affected.
Like, well, not buzzed, but
yeah, but I'd like a more intellectual word.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I can't come to think of it, but it's like inebriating. You know, you get high on the attention,
intoxicated.
You get high on pushing the limits, and then maybe you end up in a place where you necessarily didn't think you'd end up to begin with, but by then you're so numbed. And people were drinking a lot. I'm not sure that there was so much drugs back in those days, but, it becomes a whole, back to the thing about the group psychosis. It's something is normalized within a group that's not normalized by society. And, there's comfort in being in a group. And there's comfort also in being outsiders and, challenging the norms. But it was only it wasn't many years, but the effect it had was, crazy when you look back on it. So,
it still felt.
So doing the book, a lot of people, I felt that a lot of people were relieved to talk about it, that they hadn't really done that before. And I think also I wrote the book with a man, but we divided the chapters, and I wrote all the black metal chapters because we felt that it was easier for me as a woman, and also someone that had been in the scene for a long time, because we weren't that many women in the beginning. We were like 2 people per city, basically. And even though I'm not from the black metal scene, just them knowing that I was at the parties in 1989 or 1990, this is such a genre that is based on being authentic. So I think that made people trust me and really try to analyze what happened back then.
So what were some of the things that they started talking about when they were analyzing it, or stories they were telling?
Basically wondering themselves, how could it go so far? And why could I agree to such things? And why was I so cold and shut off? That they were thinking aloud. And the chapter that means most to me personally, and actually is one of the most important texts that I've written, like after almost 30 years as a music journalist, is a chapter in this book about Pelle Dead. Because I found his family, I talked to his brother, and after this, he went to Norway, he died, and they never really found out what happened. And the whole thing had been like almost, like, it was a huge trauma for the family, of course. And when I spoke to the bass player, Jørn Stubberud, also known as Necrobutcher, who's still in the band, he's the one that, quit after Euronymous had taken those photos of Dead. And he was actually the only one that went to the funeral, but no one spoke to him because when he was there, because he represented Norway that had basically killed Pelle in the views of the family. And I remember going home to Necrobutcher's house, and when he dropped me off, he was like, "Please put me in contact with Pelle's family." So the brothers and sister they have met Mayhem. The old band that Pelle had in Sweden before going to Norway and playing with Mayhem has started playing again and has been in touch with the family. This is 12 years ago. So many people here know that, but still, to me, to be able to influence people's lives, because it's been like a real catharsis for both the Mayhem guys and for the family and for the old friends, because people were furious. They were, friends here were planning to go to Norway to kill Euronymous, and when the photos did surface on a Colombian bootleg. So the family still to this day fights and tries to stop the photo being shown. The photo was, of course, shown in Lords of Chaos, the book, and tries to just stop it. And they work every day with it still.
They work every day with it. That's constant trauma. It
pops up on the internet all the time. So Anders, when one of his brothers, every time he Googles Pelle, which is maybe not every day, but it's a constant work. He always has to be prepared that image is going to come up.
That's really hard.
And it's awful, you know. But I can also, and even Anders can also, the family can also see how people would think that's cool, because it's so out there and it's so bizarre and it's so vicious. But as a family, of course, they want it, off the internet, off from the world forever. But they can still okay, if I take a step back, and I have friends that have pieces of Pelle's skull that he sent out to different, that Euronymous sent out to different people. And people can today, it's you get caught up in it, oh, so cool, a skull. And then, and the brother calls hey, can I get my brother's head back? And they're like, oh, yes, this is actually a human being. Yeah. Because Pelle's become so iconic. So it's hard to, draw the line for people. But I can understand both sides. And so can the family, even though it's hurtful.
What was that meeting like? Did they come to some type of understanding or rapprochement?
But Jørn, he quit the band after the photo, so he never did anything wrong, But I think it was harder, I think, for the family meeting the drummer who was actually still in the band and didn't leave the band. and I'm not like, but also there's been so much time. So I think it was just basically comforting for both of them and for the family to be able to ask so many questions, because they didn't have much contact with Pelle before. I mean, he was also super depressed. And some people think that Euronymous, egged him on to do it. Other people don't think that at all. And we'll never know, because both are dead. But it was important to me, and I was, what began as just trying to understand who is this artist that created all this. And also he was the one that, started with the corpse paint, wanting to look dead. And also I was the first one who wrote about, because he was always talking about that he'd had an experience, a near-death experience. And he never really said what it was. He said he fell on ice. But the thing is, he was actually beaten up in school so bad that his spleen ruptured and he almost died. And that's what would happen, because he was so bullied in school, because he was, a special person, one that probably today would get a diagnosis slapped on him pretty directly, So, but that's what it was. He was so severely beaten in school by schoolmates. Yeah. So it was interesting that how, I could never have imagined what that text would end up like when I started working on it and started researching it.
And so what was the difference in when you started and what you thought it was going to be and then what it became? What was the difference?
I had no idea what I was going to find out. I didn't even know if I was going to find his family or if they wanted to talk to me. It took years to get them to talk to me. And then, when they were so open and very courageous in what they wanted to say, I was just very grateful. And that it also led to differences in many people's lives that were had connections with Pelle back in the day. So, but I mean, so many things happened during the time we wrote the book that people who were initially skeptical to contributing changed their minds. And so that's basically a lot of stuff. I mean, I also had 2 kids. I mean, there were reasons to why it took so long. One, we had just regular jobs and we did this in our spare time. But it was the book greatly became a lot better from it, I would say. So we chose, there are some chapters on bands, but there are also chapters on like subjects, that is more like general chapters on metal and politics, metal and money, metal and gender, and metal and the media, I think it was as well.
Do you want to touch on what some of that was that you delved into?
Which ones do you mean?
Well, the 4 you just mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of subjects there.
I mean, I can give a short run through of what the chapters are.
Okay.
What we wanted to do with the book was to try to get an understanding of why Swedish extreme metal has been so successful, and to get an idea of who the vital people were and what was going on in their minds, and to try to explain the different, aspects of it. So we, of course, chose to do a chapter on Bathory, which is an early proto-black metal band. We have Niflheim, which is also a black metal band, which is not that big, but they're so black metal and they're so much into metal and the authenticity idea of it. So that's the first chapter. You're kind of thrown into this world of, super long spikes and children's coffins on stage. But they have they're really good at talking about it. So, and they're also like famous here because of an ad that was shown many years back. But so it's Bathory, it's Niflheim, it's of course the Entombed, which started off the Swedish death metal scene. And we have Dissection, which is a Swedish black metal band that was really important in the 90s. And we have Shining, which is a band that's not really big, but they're in there to represent what is called the depressive metal genre, which is basically another name for suicidal black metal, which kind of only has to do with wanting people to kill themselves, which was a genre I didn't know about before starting to write the book, but which is pretty big, actually. And then we have Vatain, which is the Sweden's foremost black metal band today. And maybe I'm kind of forgetting something. Those are basically the bands. Probably something more that I maybe have forgotten. We have Pelle Dead and Mayhem, of course, that I spoke about. But then I also have like the more general sub chapters on death metal, like the whole death metal revolution and the black metal revolution in general, and also power metal. And also I wanted to delve into the economics because so many bands were used by record companies in the beginning. Entombed, they were. What do you call it when someone totally rips you off? Yeah. Like Entombed is the most...
a classic story in the music business.
Yeah, Entombed is the most famous example. I mean, they were so huge. I don't think Earache paid them almost anything. And they still released the records, you know? So many bands, because they were teenagers, they signed really, really, really bad contracts. And we wanted to look into that. We wanted to look into how metal has been, handled in the media and all the fanzines, of course, and metal and politics, because, it is interesting how death metal is seen as a more leftist sort of genre and black metal as a sort of more far right kind of genre. So that was interesting to us to look into that. And also to me as a woman, I wanted to explore the gender, the diversity perspective.
Did that political divide become more of a thing in the last 7 years or so, with everything that's been going on in the world?
No, it's always been there.
Okay.
I would say. Because, you could kind of, if you want to generalize, you could describe death metal as a collectivistic. You want to sit down, have a good time, and have a beer with your pals, and you want to look at a horror movie, and you just want to have a good time. While black metal is more intellectual, it's more an individualist kind of genre, and it's more interested in the dark sides, and it's built on hate and evil, and exploring those sides, often in a more intellectual way as well. Just by the pure nature of the genres, it would be described as, it would be kind of easy to put them on the political different sides of the spectrum. So I wouldn't say that it's been more in the last 7 years, by which I imagine that you mean that the many governments have turned to far right leaders, as well as in Sweden. Not leaders, but they're in the government now, and it's kind of just that's happening everywhere. But I'm not sure if maybe there is a Nazi black metal subgenre called NSBM, which is a genre that I don't really follow, so I don't know if it's been getting bigger. I'm not sure. I can't answer that.
So when you were looking at gender and diversity, that what did you find there? You were saying that was your favorite topic to look into?
Well, it was an interesting topic to me because I've always been a female and male-dominated environments, and I was curious to talk to other people, both men and females, male and females, just to see others their view on things and how they had experienced things. And as a woman, at least back in the day, you get questioned more. People don't really think you like the music for real. You have to know much more If you have, I mean, you can get this story from like any female musician that, you know, people don't think they can plug in their instruments. People don't think they know anything. If you have a band shirt back in the day, you had to be prepared that people would ask you questions about the band on the shirt, because just to check that you actually could. So, but this is interesting because all the females I spoke to in this chapter had the same experiences. And while working on this exhibition that is on right now in Berlin, I did interviews with like 4 or 5 artists from each country in the Nordic region. And one of my subjects was diversity. But you can't get a man post Me Too to say anything negative on film about what they might have thought of women 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. Everyone I spoke to was like, I've always loved female metal bands. No, I've always thought it was great with women in our group. No, I always thought they knew it had their place and they were equals. I just sat there gaping. I'm like, okay, I can't question you individually, but this is just pure bullshit. Because I was like, but can't you speak generally? I know you, of course, in this day of canceling, you say something wrong and you're out. I can understand, but I was like, can't you speak generally? Like, no, this is what I think. It was crazy. It was crazy. But talk to any woman, and you'll find that the utmost majority would have the same experience as me.
Do you feel that
this has changed a lot, though?
That's what I was going to ask next. Do you feel that that's been addressed in the current scene? Yeah.
I mean, it's still, in the audience, I would say that many death and black metal shows is 50-50, but on stage, not much has happened on stage. Arch Enemy has happened. And, some other bands, Nightwish, if you consider that extreme. Of course, there are more women on stage, but there aren't many. There aren't even, there's so few. And what's interesting is that it's really hard to figure out if it's, in this day of equality, at least in our countries up here, everything needs to be 50-50, no matter what. Even if there aren't 50% women, it needs to be 50% because of a political idea that it has to be. So it's not that female bands aren't giving the chances, but also as a female, do you want to be given a chance because you're a female?
Right.
Do you feel that you dare going on stage and facing the criticisms? Or do you feel that it's just too much work? It's really hard to know why. Because the problem isn't, I don't have a problem with the fact that it just might be so that fewer women are interested in playing this kind of music on stage. That just might be the fact. That's totally okay. But what's not okay is if females don't dare to because they feel that it would be too hard to field the resistance, But I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. But we can just look at the facts. There are so few females in metal bands. And then I don't know what to do with that info, but that's just the way it is. But there are a lot of women working behind the scenes. So many managers, festival organizers, record labels. So, people say like, yeah, maybe girls don't like this aggressive kind of music. Well, that's just not true. Not at all. Mm-hmm. But so, yeah, I don't know. It might change in the future. It might not. I don't know.
One of the things that's been so interesting is the mindset that people get into, and particularly with black metal, it's almost like there's a transformation or initiatory process that goes on with the corpse paint and adopting extreme ideologies. And I don't know how long people can maintain that before they burn out or just get burnt. But that has always been really interesting to me. And is that something that's still... Okay, well, my first question in regard to that is, what exactly was that mindset in the early 90s that you talk about? You mentioned people getting into this kind of mindset. What was it? What world were they living in internally that produced all of this?
it's hard to generalize, but being a teenager, feeling like an outsider, and maybe also feeling hate towards society and life in general because you had a, traumatic upbringing in whichever way that could be, and then finding this community of like-minded people and letting that hate breed, I think it's quite easy for that to happen. And so, like in this wave, in the 90s wave of black metal, it was, pretty basic kind of occultism and Satanism that was practiced, just kind of fueling the hatred. And, to fuel hatred, that's pretty easy when you try to just find reasons to. But what has happened since then is 30 years ago. And of course, those kind of bands are still there today, often young bands. But the older bands are more intellectually into occultism. And I believe, or at least my view of it, is that a lot of people use the music for personal development and to explore spirituality and individuality within themselves. And there are many black metal bands today that it doesn't have to do a lot with, expressing violence towards others. It has to do with exploring the black flame within yourself, awakening the instincts that we all have and the darkness that we all have, and to see how can I use that in everyday life? How can I use that within my art? How can I use that in rituals to, reach a higher state of awareness? So I would say that there are several black metal bands today that are practicing Satanism or occultism at a pretty high level, like far off from what you did when you were young, and you thought Anton LaVey was cool, and that was like the utmost. And so it's very different from band to band, I would say. And also many of the bands that's been around for so long, I'm not sure that all of them identify as Satanists or anything, but you still kind of have a belief in something. But of course, it doesn't have to do with, using violence unprovoked.
It's more of an introverted intellectual thing. Definitely.
And also, I think that a lot of people, have used it in a really productive way too. There's this band that's Vatain that have spoken, like the first media-friendly black metal band in Sweden. First of all, they're really good. And so they get a lot of attention, but the singer Erik also is really good at talking about these subjects in a way that people can understand. And they speak about, building a temple on stage and releasing things. And they not only want to, affect your seeing, your sight and your hearing, they also throw rotten blood on stage and bathe in rotten blood because they want your smell, all the senses possible to be affected so you can get into a sort of meditative state or ecstatic state. So they work very deliberately with trying to create a ritual at every gig. And that's I think that was like what people wanted to do in the 90s too, but they didn't have the instruments for it, Yeah. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the intellectual tools. So I would say that black metal bands today, and of course there's also just black metal bands that just love the music and maybe aren't practicing anything on top of that, They're all sorts of bands, but those that are most interesting are the more intellectual ones, I think.
That is very interesting. The combination of music and the occult or New Age religion is certainly not unique to black metal. I mean, they've been fast friends for a long time. But the thing that's always impressed me about black metal is it's one of those scenes or micro scenes where people really do take it intellectually seriously, and that's impressive to see. I mean, it's not necessarily my cup of tea, but you can tell people are very sincere in what they're doing.
It's also very powerful music, you know. It's very loud. It's extremely chaotic. And within that, that's what I like about it. I mean, black metal is not necessarily something I listen to very often at home. I like seeing it live because you're in the eye of the storm. I can, reach some sort of total calmness when everything just swirls, the music just like, it's chaos around you. And I just, feel completely calm. And that's what I like about it. I like the sonic assault of it.
Got it.
And I also like I can like also just like a moshy kind of death metal band, just like, whoa. But I like a show. I like when people have ambitions to set something up that's special, and they use fire and pyro, and when people have really thought out a stage set. I really appreciate that in music, in any sort of genre, because I don't only listen to metal at all. And yes, I kind of like pretensions. I think when you have high, it's being pretentious is often used like as a bad thing, but I think could be a really good thing too.
I guess the last question I want to ask then is there a transformation that you feel that you've undergone being involved in this scene, a personal transformation or otherwise?
That is so hard to say, since I've been listening to metal since I was pretty much wearing diapers.
Okay.
I don't know. To me, metal is something that gives me strength and always has. And I discovered that while writing the book too. Metal can make you go to school when you don't want to. Metal can prepare you for a really hard meeting. Metal can make you resilient when you just want to cry. I mean, I'm almost 50 and I still, if I have a bad day, put on like really loud music and get on the bus to work and just sit there like, fuck you all, I hate you. And then like, hello, I'll have my coffee now, please. People are often surprised at how calm and nice people are at metal festivals. That's a thing, that there are so little fights and violence at the extreme metal festivals. It's because I think a lot of us get our frustrations out through the music. And I mean, there's been studies actually done on this at universities that, it's a catalyst for stuff you have inside. So maybe it's so, I don't think I've been transformed consciously, but maybe I've just been molded into this. I'm not sure.
Well,
but yeah, I think that's what it does for me. Makes me strong, and that I feel cool when I feel wimpy inside.
That sounds wonderful. Do you want to tell people about where to get the book and where to find out more about you?
Yes, I'm guessing that the book can be bought at any sort of online store. But I think you should go to the Feral House website, because I think they sell it there. And there are lots of other good books on this subject as well. And what I really think people should do is to go to a concert, because this is music that's meant to be experienced live. So if you can go to an extreme metal concert, you will be welcomed. It's at least, I'm not sure if it's the same in the States. I'm hoping so, but in Europe, it's a very welcoming environment. If you're interested, people are pretty often prone to being welcoming and nice and to explain how stuff works. And try to experience it and read the book. And I mean, I wrote the book with my mom in my mind. I want my mom to be able to understand. So the book is not like super nerdy in any way. It's basically, a reportage book about people and artists and a movement, and it's written in a way that everyone can understand it. At least I hope so. I think so. Yes.
Yes. All right. Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to do the show.
Well, thank you. Nice to meet you.
You too. All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. I definitely had a lot of fun in that conversation. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, my school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where you can learn all the skills you need to unleash your true self. I will see you in class, and until next time, hang in there.